Well, let's have a conversation with Iyobosa, editor, Nation's Capital this day, and of course, Frank Tietie, lawyer and a rights analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in the studio here. Let's look at this conversation. I mean, the Center for Journalism and Innovation Development is calling the attention of the president, to institute or perhaps put measures in place to protect the freedom of information and, of course, protection of journalists. Let me ask you, let me start from you, Frank Tietie. How significant is the timing of this statement, particularly with the international due to reign impunity against journalists? And, of course, why is it necessary in this conversation?
Very necessary and very important, very significant to mark this day to end impunity and crimes against journalists. There are several crimes against journalists in this country. But what's important is that when there are court orders or when there are calls for respect for the rights of journalists, such calls are made. This is not the first time that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has been called upon. I was reviewing documents by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, and I recall that one of the earlier statements made given to President Bola Tinubu by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists was to ensure that the impunity is not only ended against journalists, but some measures are put in place to protect journalists. And I must say quickly that what's one form of such impunity is that October 24th marked the 4 years that Onifade Pelumi, a journalist, was shot and killed in course of the NSAS protest in 2020. Now, the court has ordered the Nigerian authorities to release his body. The Committee for the Protection of Journalists has called upon Nigerian authorities severally to release his body to his family, and up till now, such orders have not been obeyed. So when you see a litany of court orders to the Nigerian government to respect the rights of journalists, that's where you see outright impunity. Now, we talk about protection of journalists is a different thing entirely. But where crimes have been committed against journalists, they have been killed in the line of duty. For example, people like Agba Jalingo or Alex Ogbu. Agba Jalingo, the case of Agba Jalingo for protracted incarceration for doing his work as a journalist, the court ordered that a certain compensation be paid to him. The question is, have the Nigerian authorities seen to the payment of such compensations to Agba Jalingo or to the family of Alex Ogbu, who was killed in course of covering, I think was reporting for the Regent newspaper, who was killed in course of duty? So the importance of making a statement directly to the president is that let there be a regime of respect for the rights of journalists, and when such rights are violated, particularly when they are killed or attacked in the line of duty, courts and Nigerian authorities generally, all public authorities must respect such orders.
Let me come to you, Iyobosa. I mean, you and your colleagues, you face a lot of challenges. Of course, I'm a journalist myself. So, but then what are the major concerns that you have? And why do you think this call is necessary at this time, particularly on a notable day such as this?
Well, maybe we should go back a little and find out why today, November 2nd, was declared as a national day, to call the global communities against the job of a journalist. It was an initiative that was adopted by the UN in 2011. Perhaps maybe the UN was alarmed with the way journalists were being killed all over the world. And at the end of the day, there was a resolution by the UN General Assembly that November 2nd should be declared International Day for crime against journalists. And every November 2nd, every year, journalists around the world mark that day. The whole idea was to use the day, to call government around the world, to the challenges journalists are facing in the course of performing their constitutional and social responsibility, and to also call the government to create the enabling environment for journalists and media workers to carry out their duty. So the impunity against journalists is a global challenge. You remember there was a UNESCO report that between 2006 and 2011, over 1,400 journalists were killed around the world. And if you also look at the current war that is going on between the Israel and the Palestine, over 364 journalists have been killed so far around the world. Coming to Nigeria also faced the similar challenges. Challenges about unnecessary detention of journalists without trial, attack against journalists in the course of performing their duty. And they also non-state actors against the journalists who signing under the so-called Cybercrime Act, to detain journalists. You remember in the last few months or few weeks, under the present Inspector General of Police, several journalists have been arrested, has been detained, as a result of petitions by some influential members of societies against reporters. And on the basis of that, so many journalists were detained, prosecuted, detained for months without trial. And even at the end of the day, you see a court will rule that, we don't have the jurisdiction to entertain this case. After you have detained a journalist for about 2 or 3 months, the magistrate court will come out to say, look, we don't have jurisdiction to entertain the case. So if you don't have jurisdiction to entertain the case, why detain journalists for about 3-4 months, in the first place? I think today, like every other organizations, Nigerian Guild of Editors also issue a statement, calling the federal government, to take, special or judicial notice of so many journalists who are being detained, who are currently being detained in prison. If you have any case against them, charge them to court and also give them opportunity, to defend themselves. But the situation where police are being used to intimidate journalists, to harass journalists, I think is against the global law and the local instrument, that guarantee press freedom and freedom of expressions. So every government should find a way to create the enabling environment for journalists to perform their work.
But how would you describe the relationship between perhaps security under this administration, security officers, because you talked about the fact that some of your members were harassed and some of them were arrested as well. But again, if you were to ask the president to respond to this particular call, for instance, so what would you be expecting the president to do, and how significant is this? That's one question. And the second one is that how well has the Freedom of Information Bill, has it been tested, or Act been tested?
Well, in the first place, I don't expect the relationship between the government and journalists to be very rosy. There's no way it can be. If you look at what the government, the policies and the program of the government, they have a responsibility to initiate program and policies. But it is the constitutional responsibilities to hold the government to account in all the decisions they make. And so, in a way, journalists has no permanent friends, has no permanent enemy. While the government make decisions on a daily basis, it is the responsibilities of journalists to hold them to account over their policies and programs. So on the basis of that, I don't expect the relationship between journalists and government to be very smooth. Why not ignoring the fact that journalists also have responsibilities to help promote good initiative and good policies of the government. But I must say, under this present government, the relationship between journalists and the government has not been very cordial at all. I give you an example. In the last 20 months, several journalists have been arrested, have been detained, have been attacked in the course of doing their job. Remember the End Bad Governance protests that took place recently? Several journalists, were brutalized. So many journalists were attacked. Some of their equipment, cameras were smashed. Some photographers were detained and harassed by security agents, especially the Nigerian police. So today, we are using today to draw the government attention to what journalists is facing in the course of discharging their constitutional responsibility. All over the world, the responsibility of the journalists and the responsibility of the government is very clear. And why nobody is interfering in what the government is doing, I think the government should also know that, or the security agencies should also know that, even non-state actors should also know that journalists under Section 22 of 1999 Constitution has a responsibility to hold government to account. So it's a constitutional responsibility, not just the fact that we are doing a busybody work.
Okay, I'll come to you in a moment, Frank, but let's quickly take this story. The Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria, BON, has called on the federal government and security agencies to regard journalists and other media practitioners as essential partners whose roles are to make government and public institutions accountable in order to ensure a stable, prosperous, and egalitarian society. Executive Secretary, Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria, Dr. Yemisi Bangbose, in a statement to mark the International Day of seeking an end to impunity and crimes against journalists, call on government to reorientate security agencies and other state actors on the roles of journalists and other media practitioners and making governments and all level accountable. BON advises government to stop seeing journalists and other media practitioners as enemies of the state. Well, there you have it. But let me come to you now, Frank. I mean, talking about the impact of these attacks on democracy, and what does a free press, in terms of impact on a healthy democratic society? Speak to us about that one.
You know, I think let's disabuse our minds with regards to whether or not journalists and government should be friends or enemies. You know, the free press is fundamental to having the democracy. It's of equal rank with the voting process. Because without free press, democracy is stifled, and then before you know it, will slide down into the spiral hole of dictatorship and the worst forms of government. So it's in the interest of government that it is actually upholding free press. You know, today being at the International Day for seeking to end impunity and crimes against journalists is actually supposed to be celebrated by governments, not necessarily by journalists. Governments are supposed to come out to say that, to showcase the fact that they are complying with orders of court and with others international standards with respect to protecting journalists' rights. The Global Impunity Index, published by the Committee for Protection of Journalists, has just been published. Nigeria didn't do badly, because Israel and Haiti rank the worst countries in terms of impunity against the rights of journalists. So in Nigeria, what we expect is some greater regard. Journalists' rights will often be violated, like every right of the Nigerian, as we see, because we are an emergent, country trying to still, break away from the third world status. Unfortunately, we are not doing much. But once those rights are violated, we are supposed to be talking about bodies like Broadcasting Organization of Nigeria and the Nigerian journalists, and several of them, like your own. I believe you're a member of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, and all of these bodies are meant to be alert in terms of to the rights of journalists and able to gather. And one particular one, International Press Institute, that our beloved Toby Shoni is also playing a very important role as one of the Nigerian leaders. That these bodies are supposed to be alive and well and alert to the rights of journalists. And whenever these rights are breached, they are supposed to take, remedial, mechanisms, so put remedial mechanisms in place. The problem is Nigeria accommodative to a point where it can, ensure that when these rights are breached, there will be no impunity? That's what the significance of today. So we're having a long line of journalists' rights that have been breached, and we need to see the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation come out to say he's been in the forefront, in this case, trying to show that there is compliance to orders, whether they are orders of the ECOWAS Court, orders of the Federal High Court, orders of various state high courts across the country. Now, in that case, going back to your question as to how much of the Freedom of Information Act has been complied
on democratic society.
Let me tell you, it's strange. The idea of a democracy is naturally transparency, accountability to the people, because the people own the government. The government is a small arm that works for the state to cater to the welfare of the people. So the people are able to ask questions and demand answers. And it's the journalist that is central to that. So that's why I expect that I want to see a more robust, economic package for the journalists.
So apart from the role of journalists is critical to the development.
It is so critical that it's so critical that I believe that they are under-remunerated. Forget about the welfare package that journalistic media houses like Arise News pays its staff. However, when you talk about look at the entire landscape, you find that journalists, in comparison with the great work that they do, they are under remunerated. Now, but the issue is that shows that why should you expect so much budgetary allocations given to the National Assembly that is working for democracy, and that is not also given to the journalist who is promoting democracy. So we need to look at that critically. As for the Freedom of Information Act, it's so disappointing that government officials are frustrating it, and I see journalists all the time trying to implement it. And I think it holds a lot of hope for freedom.
We have to leave now, but just if you can do that in 30 seconds in terms of what measures do you think needs to be put in place for protection of journalists? Then secondly, we also need to balance the conversations. Of course, we have some ethical practices in the sector as well, in the industry as well, and that has to be addressed. And that's why the government talks about the fact that they need to also bring a bill, cybersecurity bill and all of that, to curtail the excess of some of these unethical practices in the sector. Please speak to us quickly as we wrap up now.
Well, because of the strategic positions of the media all over the world, including Nigeria, the government must take deliberate and sustained effort to create the enabling environment for journalists to carry out their work. Because whether we like it or not, the media is the oxygen for democracy. If you destroy the media, if you suppress the journalists, you are indirectly also killing democracies in our country. So I think the federal government, or the government at all levels, both at the local government, state level, and the federal government, must take deliberate and sustained effort to create the enabling environment for journalists to carry out their responsibility, because they have a role to play in deepening our democracy. Now, as for the ethical conduct, like every other professions, we also have challenges in terms of ethical conduct. But the good thing is that recently, the Nigerian press organizations, and that of Newspaper Proprietors of Nigeria, NG, Nigeria Guild of Editors, and NUJ, set up an ombudsman headed by the former editor-in-chief of The Guardian and people by other prominent journalists in Nigeria. So that whenever you have complaint against journalists that borders on ethics, it is your responsibility to report to that council. There was a case of Daily Trust versus the federal government recently. The federal government reported Daily Trust to that council, and after several weeks, the council came up with a robust report and asked Daily Trust to apologize. And they've done that. Okay. So I'm saying that the media industries have put a mechanism in place where ethical conduct against journalists can be reported. And I can assure you that a deliberate action will be taken by that body to discipline that journalist. Dr.
Iyobosa, General Secretary, Nigerian Guild of Editors, and of course Frank Tietie, a lawyer and a rights analyst. Thank you for coming on the Newsline.